"You have 1 day to get out of this house," my daughter said. My grandson added, "You're not even my real grandma." I smiled, pulled out a document, and said, "Actually, you have 24 hours to find a new place to live. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. You have 1 day to get out of this house." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there in the kitchen doorway, my arthritic hands still gripping the dish towel I'd been using to dry the breakfast plates. Oakley's face was twisted with an anger I'd seen building for months, but hearing it directed at me with such venom made my chest tighten. "Oakley, please," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "This is my home too." She laughed, a harsh sound that made me flinch. "Your home? Mom? You've been living here rent-free for 3 years. 3 years of me supporting you, feeding you, putting a roof over your head. And what do I get in return? Nothing but complaints and judgment." I wanted to tell her that wasn't true. I wanted to remind her of all the nights I'd stayed up with Kent when he was sick, all the meals I'd cooked, all the laundry I'd folded, all the cleaning I'd done without being asked. But the words stuck in my throat like always. Kent appeared in the doorway behind his mother, his 15-year-old frame already taller than mine. The boy I'd helped raise, the child I'd sung to sleep, read stories to, bandaged scraped knees for, the grandson I'd loved with every fiber of my being looked at me with the same cold disdain as his mother. "Finally," he said, rolling his eyes. "Maybe now I can have friends over without being embarrassed." The casual cruelty in his voice made my knees weak. I reached out to steady myself against the counter, and something in that gesture seemed to irritate him further. "God, you're so dramatic," he continued, his voice gaining confidence from his mother's approving nod. "It's not like you're really my grandmother anyway. Real grandmothers don't live off their families like parasites." The word parasite echoed in my mind, bouncing around like a marble in an empty jar. I felt something inside me crack, not just my heart, but something deeper. My sense of self, my understanding of my place in this family, my belief that love could overcome anything. Oakley stepped closer, her eyes glittering with a satisfaction that made my stomach turn. "You heard him, Mom. Even Kent sees it. You're not contributing anything here. You're just existing, taking up space." I looked around the kitchen I'd organized, at the living room where I'd spent countless evenings helping Kent with homework, at the photos on the refrigerator that included me in better times. When had I become invisible in my own life? "I raised you," I said quietly, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. I rarely defended myself anymore. It was easier to just absorb their frustration and move on. "Barely," Oakley shot back. "You were always working, always stressed, always making me feel guilty for wanting things other kids had. And now you expect me to take care of you because you didn't plan for your retirement properly?" The unfairness of it took my breath away. Every double shift I'd worked had been for her. Every overtime hour, every missed social event, every sacrifice had been to give her opportunities I'd never had. But explaining that now would only make me sound pathetic. Kent crossed his arms, mimicking his mother's stance. "My friends think it's weird that you live here. Like, why can't you get your own place? My friend Jason's grandmother has this cool condo and takes him on vacations and stuff. You just make our house smell like old people." Each word was a small knife, precisely placed to cause maximum damage. I wondered when he'd learned to be so cruel, or if I'd simply been too blind to see it developing. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. Oakley shrugged. "That's not my problem anymore. Maybe one of those senior living places. They have programs for people who can't afford it on their own." The suggestion hung in the air like a threat. I'd visited those places when I was looking for options for my own mother years ago. The smell of disinfectant and despair, the vacant stares, the way the staff talked to residents like children. The thought made my hands shake. "I need more time," I said. "A day isn't enough to find somewhere to live." "You've had 3 years to figure this out," Oakley replied coldly. "I'm done enabling your dependency. It's not healthy for any of us." She turned to Kent, her voice becoming warm and maternal in a way it never was when she addressed me. "Go start your homework, honey. Grandma and I need to finish talking." Kent grinned, clearly pleased to be dismissed from witness duty but satisfied with the damage he'd helped inflict. As he walked away, I heard him mutter, "Finally, some peace and quiet." When we were alone, Oakley's expression softened slightly, but not with kindness. It was the look of someone about to deliver a final blow. "Mom, I know this seems harsh, but it's for your own good. You need to learn to be independent again. You've become too comfortable depending on others." The irony wasn't lost on me. This from the woman who'd called me crying at midnight when Kent was a toddler, and she couldn't handle being a single mother. This from the daughter who'd begged me to move in when her ex-husband stopped paying child support. This from the child I'd sacrificed everything for. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I nodded slowly, feeling something shift inside me. Not broken this time, but hardened, like steel being forged in fire. "I understand," I said quietly. Oakley looked surprised by my compliance. She'd probably expected tears, begging, maybe even threats to call other family members. But I just stood there, looking at her with new eyes. "Good," she said, though she sounded uncertain now. "I mean, this is really for the best. You'll see." I walked slowly to my room, feeling their eyes on my back. Behind me, I heard Oakley on the phone, probably calling her sister to complain about what a burden I'd become. The familiar sting of being discussed like an object rather than a person washed over me. In my room, I sat on the bed I'd bought with my own money and looked around at my modest possessions. Photos of Oakley and Kent, books I'd accumulated over decades, the jewelry box my mother had given me. Such a small life, when viewed through their eyes. But as I sat there, something strange happened. Instead of the usual despair that followed these confrontations, I felt a calm clarity settling over me. They wanted me gone? Fine. They thought I was powerless? We'd see about that. I reached into my nightstand drawer and pulled out a manila folder I'd hoped never to need. Inside were documents that would change everything. Documents that proved just how wrong they were about who held the power in this house. Tomorrow, when I was supposed to be packing my things in shame, I would show them exactly who Paulette Morrison really was. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Kent's voice calling me a parasite, saw Oakley's satisfied smirk as she delivered her ultimatum. But lying there in the darkness, other memories began to surface. Memories I'd buried under years of trying to keep the peace. I remembered the phone call that changed everything 3 years ago. Oakley's voice had been shaking, desperate in a way I hadn't heard since she was a little girl afraid of thunderstorms. "Mom, I don't know what to do. David stopped sending child support checks. The bank is threatening foreclosure. I might lose the house." She'd been crying, really crying, not the manipulative tears she'd perfected as a teenager. And like always, my maternal instincts kicked in before my common sense could catch up. "How much do you need?" I'd asked, already calculating how much I could pull from my retirement savings. "I don't know. Maybe? Maybe you could come stay with us for a while. Help with Kent and the house payments? Just until I get back on my feet." Just until. Those words had been the beginning of the end of my independence. I'd sold my small but comfortable apartment, the one I'd worked for 30 years to pay off. I'd liquidated my savings account, cashed in bonds, even sold my mother's engagement ring, all to help Oakley keep this house, the house she now claimed was hers alone. The first few months hadn't been too bad. Oakley had been grateful then, almost like the daughter I remembered from better times. She'd included me in decisions, asked for my advice, even thanked me for the sacrifices I was making. But gratitude, I'd learned, has a short shelf life. By the 6-month mark, my presence had become expected rather than appreciated. By the first year, I'd somehow transformed from savior to burden. The woman who'd begged me to save her home was now treating me like an unwelcome guest who'd overstayed her welcome. I thought about all the small humiliations that had accumulated over the years. The way Oakley introduced me to her friends. "This is my mother. She's staying with us for a while." Never, "This is my mother who saved our house," or even just, "This is my mother, Paulette." Always with that qualifier that made my presence sound temporary and slightly embarrassing. Then there were the house rules that gradually appeared. Don't use the good towels, don't eat the expensive yogurt, Don't have the TV too loud. Don't invite anyone over without asking first. Don't rearrange the furniture. Don't. I'd watched myself shrink, both physically and emotionally, trying to take up less space in a house I'd helped save. The worst part was watching Kent change. When I'd first moved in, he'd been 12 and still sweet. Still the little boy who'd climb into my lap for stories. But as he grew older and absorbed his mother's attitude toward me, he'd become a stranger. A cold, entitled stranger who saw me as an inconvenience. I remembered his 13th birthday party. I'd spent days planning it, buying decorations with my Social Security money, baking his favorite cake from scratch. But when his friends arrived, he'd asked me to stay in your room so my friends don't think you live here. The humiliation had been crushing, but I'd complied. I always complied. Or the time I'd offered to help him with his history project about family heritage. He'd looked at me like I'd suggested something disgusting. Why would I want to include you? You're not even really family. You're just mom's mom. Just mom's mom. As if our relationship existed only through Oakley. As if I had no independent value in his life. I'd stopped trying after that. Stopped offering help with homework. Stopped asking about his day, stopped attempting to connect with the grandson I'd once adored. It was easier than facing constant rejection, but the memories that hurt most were the ones from when Oakley was young. I'd been a single mother since she was 5, when her father decided that responsibility wasn't for him. I'd worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to give her the kind of childhood I'd never had. I remembered the Christmas when she was 8 and desperately wanted a bike. Not just any bike, but the pink one with streamers and a basket that all her friends had. I'd worked overtime at the diner for 2 months, saving every tip, skipping meals to afford it. Christmas morning, her face had lit up like the sun when she saw that bike under our pathetic little tree. She'd hugged me so tight I could barely breathe and whispered, "You're the best mom in the whole world." Where was that little girl now? When had gratitude curdled into entitlement? When had love become obligation? I thought about all the parent-teacher conferences I'd attended despite being exhausted from night shifts. All the soccer games I'd cheered at despite having to stand because I couldn't afford the chair rental fee. All the times I'd said yes when every practical instinct screamed no. When Oakley graduated high school, I'd given her my grandmother's pearl necklace, the only valuable thing I owned besides my engagement ring. It had been in our family for 3 generations. She'd worn it to prom, to graduation, to her wedding. But last year, when money was tight, she'd sold it without even telling me. I'd only found out when I was looking for something in her jewelry box and noticed it was gone. "Oh, that old thing," she'd said when I asked. "I sold it. The pearls weren't even real, Mom. I got it appraised." They had been real. My grandmother had sacrificed to buy them, just like I'd sacrificed to keep them in the family. But Oakley's casual dismissal had told me everything I needed to know about how she viewed our family history, our traditions, our connections. Now, sitting in the darkness of what they considered their house, I felt the weight of all those years pressing down on me. Every sacrifice dismissed, every gesture of love forgotten, every piece of myself I'd given away treated as worthless. But tomorrow, they would learn the truth. Tomorrow, they would discover that the woman they'd been treating like a charity case was actually the one holding all the cards. I pulled the manila folder closer and opened it by the light of my phone. Property deed, purchase agreement, bank statements, transfer documents. All the proof I needed that their comfortable life had been built on a foundation they knew nothing about. Let them sleep soundly tonight. Let them dream about their newfound freedom from the burden of supporting me. Because when morning came, they were going to wake up to a reality that would shatter everything they thought they knew. The powerless old woman they'd spent 3 years diminishing was about to remind them who really owned the ground they stood on. The morning sun streamed through my bedroom window as I heard Oakley moving around the kitchen, probably making her usual rushed breakfast before work. I'd been awake since 5. Sitting quietly with the manila folder in my lap, waiting for the right moment. I could hear Kent in the shower, getting ready for school. Normal sounds of a normal morning, except today would be anything but normal. My hands were steady as I walked to the kitchen. The arthritis that usually made my fingers ache seemed to have disappeared, replaced by a strange sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Oakley stood at the counter, scrolling through her phone while her coffee brewed. She looked up when I entered, her expression immediately shifting to that familiar mixture of impatience and annoyance. "Good, you're up," she said, not looking at me. "I hope you spent the night making arrangements." "I meant what I said yesterday." "I know you did," I replied quietly, setting the folder on the kitchen island between us. She glanced at it with mild curiosity. "What's that? Your medical records? Because if you think showing me bills will make me feel guilty." "It's not medical records," I said, my voice calmer than I'd heard it in months. "It's something you need to see." Kent bounded into the kitchen, his hair still damp from the shower. He grabbed a piece of toast and started slathering it with peanut butter, completely ignoring my presence. The casual dismissal that had once hurt so deeply now felt almost laughable. "What time do you want me to call the moving truck?" Oakley asked, still not opening the folder. "Because I've got meetings all afternoon and I want this handled before." "Open it," I said, my voice cutting through her words like a blade. Something in my tone made both of them look at me, really look at me, perhaps for the first time in years. Kent paused mid-bite, his eyes darting between his mother and me. Oakley's laugh was nervous now. "Mom, what is this? Some kind of dramatic gesture? Because I don't have time for." "Open the folder, Oakley." She stared at me for a long moment, then reached for the manila folder with exaggerated irritation. "Fine. Let's get this over with." The first document she pulled out was the property deed. I watched her eyes scan the page, saw the moment when her brain processed what she was reading. Her face went pale, then flushed red, then pale again. She started, then stopped, reading it again. "This can't be right." "What is it?" Kent asked, moving closer to peer over her shoulder. Oakley's hands were shaking now as she flipped through the other documents. Bank transfer records showing my retirement money funding the down payment. Loan documents with my name as the primary borrower. Insurance papers listing me as the sole owner. "I don't understand," she whispered, but I could see in her eyes that she was beginning to. "3 years ago, when you called me crying about losing the house," I said, my voice steady and clear. "You weren't just asking me to help with payments. The bank had already started foreclosure proceedings. Your credit was destroyed. David's missed child support payments had left you months behind on everything." Kent was reading over her shoulder now, his expression shifting from confusion to something approaching fear. "The only way to save this house was for someone else to buy it outright," I continued. "Someone with good credit and enough cash for a down payment. So I bought it. All of it. The house, the land, everything." Oakley sank into a chair, still clutching the papers. "But you told me you were helping with the mortgage payments." "I was. I've been paying the mortgage on my own house for 3 years while you treated me like a burden you were graciously supporting." The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Kent's toast hung forgotten in his hand, peanut butter dripping onto the floor. "Why?" Oakley's voice was barely a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I thought it would hurt your pride. I thought if you knew the truth, you'd feel guilty, maybe even ashamed. I wanted you to feel secure in your own home, not like you were living in mine." I pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, feeling older than my 69 years, but somehow stronger too. "I put the deed in my name to protect both of us. If something happened to you, Kent would still have a home. If something happened to me, the house would go to you in my will. I thought I was being generous. I thought I was being a good mother." Oakley was crying now, but they weren't the manipulative tears I'd grown accustomed to. These were the tears of someone whose entire world had just shifted beneath their feet. "Mom, she started, but I held up my hand. "Let me finish," I said. "For 3 years, I've watched you treat me like a charity case, like a burden you were noble enough to carry. You've made me feel small and unwelcome and ashamed of needing help. You've let your son speak to me in ways that would have gotten you grounded for a month when you were his age." Kent flinched at that, finally understanding that his casual cruelty hadn't gone unnoticed. "And yesterday," I continued, "you told me I had 1 day to get out of your house. You made me feel like a parasite, like someone taking advantage of your generosity." I reached across the table and gently took the deed from Oakley's trembling hands. "But this isn't your house, sweetheart. It's mine. It's been mine for 3 years, and if anyone needs to find somewhere else to live, it's not me. The color drained completely from Oakley's face. You can't be serious. Yesterday, Kent told me I wasn't really his grandmother. You told me I was a burden, that I was taking up space, that I wasn't contributing anything. I folded the deed carefully and put it back in the folder. Well, now you know exactly what I've been contributing. Kent dropped his toast, the sound of it hitting the floor echoing in the stunned silence. Grandma, he said, and hearing him use that word again after so long made my chest tight. I didn't mean. Yes, you did, I said gently but firmly. You both did, and that's okay, because now we're all clear about where we stand. Oakley was hyperventilating now, her breath coming in short gasps. Mom, please. I was angry yesterday. I was stressed about work and money, and I didn't mean those things. Yes, you did, I repeated. And you've meant them for a long time. This wasn't one bad day, Oakley. This has been building for 3 years. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in months. Now, I believe someone mentioned something about having 24 hours to pack? Oakley's eyes went wide. You're kicking us out? Mom, we have nowhere to go. I'm sure you'll figure something out, I said, using the same dismissive tone she'd perfected over the years. You're both young and capable. Maybe one of those apartments downtown would suit you better. But Mom, Oakley started to stand, then seemed to remember she was holding onto the table for support and sat back down heavily. The sound of her body hitting the chair was the last thing I heard before she slumped forward, unconscious. Kent screamed. Oakley came to 5 minutes later, sprawled on the kitchen floor with Kent kneeling beside her, his face pale with panic. I'd calmly gotten a damp washcloth and was sitting in my chair, waiting. Mom, Kent was saying, patting her cheek frantically. Mom, wake up. When her eyes fluttered open, the first thing she saw was me sitting there, completely composed. For a moment, confusion clouded her face. Then reality crashed back like a wave. Oh God, she whispered, struggling to sit up. This is really happening. I handed her the washcloth. Drink some water. Slowly, she accepted it with shaking hands, her eyes never leaving my face. Looking for some sign that this was all an elaborate joke, perhaps. Some indication that her pushover mother would cave and take it all back. She wouldn't find it. Grandma, Kent said, and his voice cracked on the word. Please, we're sorry. We didn't know. Didn't know what? I asked gently. That I'm a human being with feelings? That treating someone badly has consequences? That actions matter? He flinched like I'd slapped him. I was being stupid. I didn't mean those things I said. About me not being your real grandmother? About me being a parasite? About being embarrassed to have me in the house? I kept my voice level, but each word hit its mark. Which part didn't you mean, Kent? Tears started rolling down his cheeks. Real tears this time. Not the crocodile tears he'd learned from his mother. All of it. I mean, none of it. I was just being mean because your mother taught you it was acceptable to treat me that way. I finished for him. Because you've watched her dismiss me and diminish me for 3 years, and you learned that it was okay to do the same. Oakley had managed to pull herself into a chair, though she still looked like she might faint again. Mom, I know I haven't been. I know I've made mistakes, but you can't just throw us out. We're family. The word family hung in the air between us like a challenge. Family? I repeated slowly. Is that what we are? Because yesterday you made it very clear that I wasn't family. I was a burden, a parasite, someone taking advantage of your generosity. I was angry, she said desperately. People say things when they're angry, you know that. Do they? I asked. Because when I was angry about you selling my grandmother's pearls without asking, I didn't call you names. When I was hurt that you never included me in family photos anymore, I didn't threaten to kick you out. When I was lonely, because both of you treated me like I was invisible, I didn't make you feel unwelcome in your own home. Each example hit like a physical blow. I could see them both remembering, recognizing the truth in what I was saying. But I did make you feel unwelcome, Oakley whispered. Didn't I? Yes, I said simply. You did. Kent was crying harder now. We can change. I can be better. I promise. Can you? I asked. Because this isn't the first time we've had this conversation. Every time I've tried to address how you both treat me, I get told I'm being oversensitive or dramatic. Every time I've asked for basic respect, I've been made to feel like I'm asking for too much. I reached for the folder again and pulled out another set of documents. Do you want to know what else I've been paying for? Oakley's face went even paler, if that was possible. What do you mean? Kent's school fees. The private school you told everyone you were sacrificing to afford? I've been paying that tuition since he started there. Every month, $200 from my Social Security check. Kent's mouth fell open. But Mom said, your mother has told you a lot of things that weren't exactly true, I said. The car insurance on that Honda you drive to school? Mine. The health insurance that covers your dental work and your sports physicals? Mine. The internet bill so you can play your video games? Also mine. I spread the statements across the table like a poker player revealing a winning hand. The grocery bills, the utility payments, the property taxes, the homeowner's insurance. Should I go on? Oakley was making small gasping sounds like a fish out of water. I thought. I was contributing too. My salary. Your salary barely covers your car payment and your credit card bills, I said. I've been supporting this entire household while you told yourself you were supporting me. The truth settled over the kitchen like a heavy blanket. Kent looked between his mother and me, clearly trying to process this complete reversal of everything he'd believed. So when you said I was taking up space, I continued, what you really meant was that I was taking up space in the house I own, eating food I buy, using utilities I pay for, while contributing nothing but the labor that keeps this household running. Mom? Oakley's voice was barely audible. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was that much. You didn't want to know, I corrected. There's a difference. You wanted to believe you were the generous daughter taking care of her helpless mother because it made you feel good about yourself. It made you feel powerful and noble and in control. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard I'd been maintaining for 3 years. The garden I'd planted, the fence I'd had repaired, the deck I'd had restained. But the truth is, you've been living off me while treating me like a burden. You've been raising your son to disrespect the woman who's actually supporting him. You've been playing house with my money while making me feel grateful for the privilege. When I turned back around, they were both staring at me with expressions I'd never seen before. Not anger or irritation or dismissal. Something closer to fear. 24 hours, I said quietly. That's what you gave me. So that's what I'm giving you. But where will we go? Kent asked, his voice small and young. I don't know, I admitted. But I'm sure you'll figure something out. After all, you're both young and capable. You have each other. You have options I never had when I was starting over. Oakley gripped the edge of the table. You're really going to do this? You're really going to make us homeless? I'm not making you anything, I said. I'm simply taking back ownership of my own life. You wanted me gone? Fine. Now you can be gone instead. But we're sorry, Kent burst out. We said we were sorry. Sorry you got caught, I said gently. Sorry you're facing consequences. But are you sorry for how you treated me? Or are you sorry that treating me badly turned out to be a mistake? The question hung in the air, unanswered because we all knew what the truth was. I picked up my folder and headed toward my room. You have until tomorrow morning. I'd suggest you start making phone calls. Behind me, I could hear Oakley sobbing and Kent trying to comfort her. The sounds that once would have broken my heart and sent me rushing back to fix everything now just felt like noise. For the first time in 3 years, I was the one in control of my own destiny. And it felt incredible. The house felt different the moment their car pulled out of the driveway. Not empty, liberated. Like a breath I'd been holding for 3 years had finally been released. They'd left that morning with whatever they could fit in Oakley's Honda and a U-Haul trailer Kent had rented with money borrowed from his father. The same father who'd abandoned them years ago but suddenly became available when they needed somewhere to stay. Funny how that worked. Oakley had tried one last manipulation at the door, Kent clinging to her side like he was 12 again instead of 15. Mom, please, she'd whispered. her eyes red from crying. Just give us another chance. We can make this work. But her idea of making it work was for me to pretend the last 3 years hadn't happened, to go back to being grateful for scraps of attention while paying for the privilege. You'll always have a chance to earn your way back into my life, I'd told her, but it will be on my terms, not yours. The look she'd given me then was pure shock. Her pushover mother, setting terms? It was like watching someone discover that their pet goldfish had grown teeth. Now, standing in my kitchen, I felt like I was seeing the space clearly for the first time in years. The cabinet doors Oakley had insisted on keeping closed because open shelving looks cheap. The expensive coffee maker I wasn't allowed to use because you don't know how to work it properly. The breakfast nook where I'd been relegated to eating my meals while they sat at the good dining table. I opened every single cabinet door. I made myself a latte with the fancy machine. I sat at the head of the dining table and spread my papers across its entire surface. The silence was magnificent. My phone had been ringing all day. First Oakley, then Kent, then Oakley's sister Beth, who'd apparently been designated as the family negotiator. "Aunt Paulette, this is crazy," Beth had said when I finally answered. "Oakley told me what happened, and I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I'd replied calmly. "Just a long overdue correction." "But they're family. You can't just throw family out on the street." I'd laughed at that, surprising myself with how bitter it sounded. "Beth, when was the last time Oakley invited you to a family gathering that included me? When was the last time Kent mentioned me when he talked about his family? They made it very clear I wasn't family. I'm just honoring their decision." The conversations with other relatives followed the same pattern. Shock, attempted guilt-tripping, then awkward silence when they realized I wasn't budging. It occurred to me that none of them had called in 3 years to check on how I was doing living with Oakley. None of them had noticed that I'd gradually disappeared from family photos and holiday celebrations. But the moment there were consequences for that exclusion, suddenly everyone cared about family unity. By evening, I'd unplugged the phone entirely. I spent the next few days rediscovering my own house. I moved my belongings from the cramped back bedroom to the master suite Oakley had claimed as her own. I rearranged furniture, opened curtains that had been kept closed, and played my music as loud as I wanted. In Oakley's closet, I found boxes of my things that had been stored away temporarily 3 years ago. Photos of my parents, books I'd thought were lost, the china set I'd inherited from my grandmother. All hidden away because they didn't fit Oakley's aesthetic. I found my grandmother's recipe box tucked behind winter coats I'd never seen Oakley wear. Inside were handwritten cards with instructions for Sunday dinners and holiday traditions that Oakley had declared too much work to continue. That weekend, I made my grandmother's pot roast, filled the house with the smell of herbs and slow-cooked vegetables. I set the dining table with the good china and cloth napkins. I lit candles and opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. Then I called my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who'd been politely distant for years because Oakley had made it clear that Mom's friends weren't welcome. "Paulette?" She'd sounded surprised to hear from me. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is perfect," I'd said. "Would you like to come for dinner? I'm making pot roast." That dinner was the first time I'd entertained in my own home since moving in. Mrs. Chen brought her sister, who brought her friend Margaret, and by the end of the evening, my house was filled with laughter and conversation in a way it never had been with Oakley and Kent. "This house has such good energy," Margaret had said, looking around the living room. "So warm and welcoming." If only she knew how unwelcoming it had felt just a week ago. The phone calls from Oakley became more desperate as the days passed. She'd moved in with David temporarily, but his new girlfriend wasn't happy about the arrangement. Kent was sleeping on a couch and complaining constantly about missing his friends and his school. "Mom, this is ridiculous," Oakley said during one late-night call. "You've made your point. We get it. We were wrong. Can't we just move past this?" "Move past it to what?" I'd asked. "Back to you treating me like hired help? Back to Kent acting like I'm an embarrassment? Back to me paying for everything while being made to feel like a burden? We'll be better," she'd promised. "Things will be different." How? The question had hung in the air for a long moment before she'd hung up. That's when I knew she still didn't understand. She thought this was about punishment, about teaching them a lesson they'd learn, and then everything would go back to normal. But this wasn't about punishment. This was about me finally understanding my own worth. I started making changes beyond just reclaiming my space. I switched Kent's school payments to a monthly transfer that would end if his grades dropped or if I received any reports of disrespectful behavior. I set up automatic payments for health insurance that could be canceled with 30 days' notice. I opened new credit cards in my name only and closed the joint accounts where Oakley had been an authorized user. Most importantly, I changed my will. For years, I'd planned to leave everything to Oakley and Kent. The house, my savings, my life insurance policy. They were my only family, after all. But family, I'd learned, was about more than blood. It was about respect, kindness, and mutual care. It was about valuing each other as human beings, not just as sources of convenience or obligation. I made an appointment with my lawyer and created a new will that established a trust for Kent's education, but only if he maintained certain standards of behavior and academic performance. The house and remaining assets would go to charities that supported elderly people who'd been mistreated by their families. Oakley would inherit exactly what she'd told me I was worth. Nothing. 3 weeks after they'd moved out, I was watering the plants in my front garden when a car pulled up. Kent got out of the passenger side, looking older somehow, more serious. He approached slowly like he was afraid I might send him away. "Hi, Grandma," he said quietly. "Hello, Kent." I kept watering, not making it easy for him. "I wanted to apologize," he said, "for real this time. Not because I want something, but because what I said was wrong." I looked at him then, really looked. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair needed cutting, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "Are you apologizing because you understand why it was wrong, or because you don't like the consequences?" He thought about that for a moment. "Both, I guess. But mostly because I hurt you, and you didn't deserve it." It was the first genuinely mature thing I'd heard him say in years. "I miss you," he continued. "I miss living here, but I also just miss you. I miss talking to you and having you help me with stuff and eating your cooking." "What stuff did I help you with?" I asked, curious if he remembered. "Everything," he said, his voice getting thick. "Math homework and friend problems. And that time I was scared about starting high school. You always listened and never made me feel stupid. And how did you repay that?" He flinched. "By being a selfish brat who cared more about what his friends thought than about hurting someone who loved him." The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the manipulation I'd grown used to from Oakley. This was genuine remorse. "Your mother doesn't know you're here, does she?" He shook his head. "She thinks I'm at basketball practice, but I wanted to come by myself because this is between you and me, isn't it? What I said to you, smart boy, smarter than his mother certainly. What do you want from me, Kent? I want to know if there's any way I can earn your forgiveness. And maybe someday earn the right to be your grandson again." The phrase, "earn the right," told me everything I needed to know about how much his perspective had changed. "That depends," I said. "Are you willing to do the work even if your mother isn't?" 6 months later, I was sitting on my back deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The garden was thriving, the roses I'd planted were beginning to bloom, and the house behind me hummed with the quiet contentment of a space that was truly mine. Kent had kept his word. Every week he'd find a way to visit, sometimes claiming basketball practice, sometimes saying he was studying at the library. We'd started slowly, with him helping me with yard work while we talked about school, friends, and life. The transformation in him was remarkable. Without his mother's constant reinforcement of his entitlement, he'd begun to remember who he used to be. The sweet, thoughtful boy I'd helped raise was still there underneath the teenage bravado. He'd brought his report card last week. Straight A's for the first time in 2 years. "I figured if you're paying for my education, I should probably take it seriously," he'd said, and I'd heard genuine pride in his voice. We'd established rules for our relationship. He would treat me with respect, period. He would acknowledge my role in his life openly, not hide it from friends or pretend I didn't matter. Most importantly, he would never again use my love for him as a weapon against me. In return, I continued to support his education and included him in my daily life. We cooked together on Sundays, and I'd started teaching him some of my grandmother's recipes. He'd even brought a friend over once, introducing me as My awesome grandmother who makes the best chocolate chip cookies in the state. The pride I'd felt in that moment was worth every painful day of the past 3 years. Oakley, on the other hand, remained stubborn. She'd tried everything from guilt trips to bribes to get back into my good graces. She'd shown up with flowers, with apology letters, with promises to change. She'd even offered to pay rent to live in her old room. But she still didn't understand the fundamental issue. I said I was sorry, she'd argued during our last conversation. How many times do I have to apologize before you forgive me? It's not about the number of apologies, I'd explained patiently. It's about understanding what you're apologizing for. I treated you badly. I was ungrateful. I hurt your feelings. What else do you want me to say? I want you to understand why you treated me badly. I want you to recognize the pattern of behavior that led to this moment, and I want you to do the work to change it, not just promise to change. She'd hung up in frustration, and I hadn't heard from her since. The truth was, I wasn't sure Oakley was capable of the kind of self-reflection required for genuine change. She'd spent too many years believing she was the victim in every situation, the one who was owed rather than the one who owed. But I'd learned that I couldn't fix other people. I could only control my own choices and protect my own peace. My phone rang, interrupting my sunset meditation. Kent's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, Grandma," his voice was excited. "Guess what? I got accepted to the summer program at the university, the one for high school students interested in engineering." "That's wonderful," I said, and meant it. "When does it start?" "Next month. And Grandma, I put you down as my emergency contact. I hope that's okay." The significance of that gesture wasn't lost on me. For the first time in years, I was being acknowledged as a primary person in his life. Not hidden away like a shameful secret. "Of course it's okay," I said. "I'm proud of you, Kent." "I couldn't have done it without you," he said quietly. "Not just the money for the application, but you believing in me again. It made me want to be someone worth believing in." After we hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Not the bitter satisfaction of revenge, but the warm satisfaction of self-respect restored. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, small, diminished, grateful for scraps of attention from people who treated me as an inconvenience. That woman felt like a stranger now. I'd spent so many years believing that love meant accepting whatever treatment people chose to give me. That being a good mother meant sacrificing my dignity along with my money. That keeping the peace was more important than demanding respect. But I'd learned that real love, the kind worth having, required mutual respect. That good relationships were built on appreciation, not exploitation. And that sometimes, the most loving thing you could do was refuse to enable someone's worst behavior. My doorbell rang, surprising me. It was late for visitors, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to find Oakley standing on my porch, but she looked different. Smaller, somehow. Less put together than usual. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wasn't wearing makeup. "Mom," she said quietly, "can we talk?" I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or desperation. Instead, I saw something I hadn't seen in years: humility. "All right," I said, stepping aside to let her in. We sat in my living room, now decorated with my own photos and furniture arranged the way I liked it. She looked around, taking in the changes. "It looks good," she said. "It looks like you." "Thank you." We sat in silence for a moment before she spoke again. "I've been seeing a therapist," she said. "Dr. Martinez. She specializes in family relationships." I raised an eyebrow. Oakley had always dismissed therapy as paying someone to tell you what you already know. "What made you decide to do that?" "Kent," she said simply. "He asked me why I was so angry all the time, why I said mean things to people I loved. And I realized I didn't have a good answer." She picked at a thread on her jeans, not meeting my eyes. "Dr. Martinez helped me understand some things about myself, about why I need to be in control all the time, why I get angry when people don't need me the way I think they should." "And what did you discover?" "That I was terrified," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Terrified that if people didn't need me, they'd leave. like Dad did. So I created situations where people had to depend on me, and then I resented them for it. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in years. And with you, she continued, I couldn't stand that you were taking care of me instead of the other way around. It made me feel like a failure, like a little girl who couldn't handle her own life. So I convinced myself that you were the one who needed me. Even though you knew I was paying for everything, she nodded, tears starting to fall. I knew. Deep down, I knew. But I told myself stories about how you needed the structure, how living with us was good for you. I made myself believe that I was doing you a favor. Why are you telling me this now? Because Kent deserves better, she said. And because you deserved better. And because I want to be the kind of person who can admit when she's wrong and actually do something about it. I leaned back in my chair, studying my daughter's face. This wasn't the same woman who'd demanded I leave 6 months ago. This was someone who'd done genuine work on herself. What do you want from me, Oakley? Nothing, she said, and the word surprised me. I don't want anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand what I did and why I did it. And I'm sorry. Really, truly sorry. And if I never forgive you, if this conversation doesn't change anything between us, she took a shaky breath, then at least you'll know that I finally see you. The real you. The woman who sacrificed everything for her daughter and got treated like garbage in return. The woman who loved her grandson unconditionally and was made to feel like that love was worthless. She stood up, wiping her eyes. Kent told me he's been visiting you. I'm glad. He needs you in his life, and you deserve to have someone appreciate you the way he's learning to. She headed toward the door, then paused. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but would you consider letting me earn my way back into your life? Not as someone you take care of, and not as someone who takes care of you. Just as your daughter who finally understands what that means? I looked at this woman who'd caused me so much pain, who'd made me feel small and worthless and unwanted. But I also saw the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who'd hugged me tight on Christmas morning, who'd once told me I was the best mom in the world. It would be a long process, I said finally, and it would have to be on my terms. I understand. You'd have to prove that this isn't just temporary remorse, that you've genuinely changed, not just learned what I want to hear. I understand that too. And you'd have to accept that our relationship will never go back to the way it was. I'm not the same person who would accept disrespect to keep the peace. She nodded. I wouldn't want it to go back. That relationship was toxic for both of us. I walked her to the door, feeling lighter than I had in months. Not because I'd decided to forgive her, but because I finally had a choice. Real power in determining the terms of my own relationships. Call me next week, I said. We'll see how it goes. After she left, I returned to my deck and looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely hopeful about the future. I'd learned that respect wasn't something you could demand, but it was something you could require. That love without respect was just manipulation with prettier packaging, and that sometimes the most courageous thing you could do was value yourself enough to walk away from people who didn't. Whether Oakley would do the work to earn her place back in my life remained to be seen. But either way, I'd be fine. I had a home I loved, friends who valued me, a grandson who was learning to be a good man, and most importantly, I had myself back. At 69 years old, I'd finally learned that the only person whose approval I really needed was my own. And for the first time in years, I had it. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.